Good morning, everybody. It is great to be here. I bring you greetings from the church in New York, and things are going great in New York City, and it is great to be here with all of you. I have 30 minutes. Randy sent me that email. I sent him one back, and I said, that's a perfect case of someone saying, do as I do, do as I say, not as I do. Yeah, he claims I'm persecuting him. I say I'm just trying to give him a dose of reality. I love Randy McKean. I love Kay. They're doing a great job. And what energy and enthusiasm and zeal you get from them. It's fantastic. And Kay is on our teacher service team now. Some of you probably didn't know that there can be women teachers, and there are women teachers. And I want to encourage you to, if you have that gift and that skill, to aspire to be a woman teacher, because it's a great, great role that we have in our churches. And Kay's doing a great job leading the women down this path of teaching, and we are encouraged as a service team to be able to have her on the service team. I also want to just thank all of the people that organized and planned the Hope Summit. It has been a life-changing weekend for me, for my wife Lee. Yes, amen. Thanks to the Jordans for all that you do and for planning this weekend and pulling us all together. When we arrived on Friday, I told Lee, I said, get ready to cry. And she thought I had something bad to tell her, you know. She said, why? And I said, honey, it's Hope Worldwide. Okay, that's what they do. They make you cry. And I've been watching Hope videos for years and years now, a couple of decades now, and they always make me cry. And I started crying on Friday. I cried yesterday. If I pause too long, I'll cry right now. But I'm thankful to Hope. I'm thankful to the Gimples for what they've done. And I'm thankful to all of you that work with Hope, for Mark and everyone else, for Gary and everyone, the people that run the chapters, the people that are on the board, the people that volunteer, and the people that make the videos, because you do touch our hearts. You bring tears to our eyes, and we need that. We need our hearts to be touched. We need to be moved to act with compassion, because that's what Jesus did. So I'm going to jump right into this. I've got to get to the Word, because that's what I do. I'm a teacher, and I love to teach the Word. And so I need to get into the text itself and talk about the text some. I'm a teacher and an evangelist with the New York City Church. I'm also an adjunct professor at Lincoln Christian University. Just finished teaching a course there on Jesus and spiritual formation. And so this is what I do. I like to teach. I like to get into the text. And so let's go ahead and look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21. This will sort of be our launching pad today to get into talking about a couple of parables together. What I want us to do is to see where the feet of Jesus took us by looking at a couple of parables, and one in which it shows us how we shouldn't be, the non-Christian response to poverty, the other one that shows us the Christian response to poverty. And by putting these together to be able to see where the steps of Jesus take us. This is a great verse. To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. It's a very famous verse. At the turn of the 1900s, there was a book written by Charles Sheldon called In His Steps. And that book really was a book that caused many churches to take a look at what they weren't doing to try to answer the needs of poverty and the poor in the world. And of course, that idea of the question that Charles Sheldon formed in his book was, what would Jesus do? And many of you that have worn the bracelets, WWJD, you might not even realize that goes back all the way to the early 1900s. As he posed this question to the church, just asking them, what would Jesus do? If a beggar were at your door, what would the response of Jesus be? What would Jesus do? Now, that very book and a number of other books in the 1980s when I was in seminary led me to thinking about poverty in the world, the poor, our Christian response to the poor. And I read numerous books on this topic. In my master's program at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, I actually took courses in this. I actually took side courses in it. I asked professors if they would just allow me to do independent study in this area. And it led me to a number of books and to a number of people that talk about this and write about this. The writings of Walter Rauschenbusch, for example, that I know many of you don't know his name, but he wrote some amazing works in this area. It led me to looking at the life and the words of Mother Teresa, exploring her books and seeing what she had to say. It caused me again to pick up this book, In His Steps, and take a look and ask myself, where do the steps of Jesus lead? And that's what I want us to talk about today. As I was looking at especially Mother Teresa's life, it caused me to decide that I wanted to be a missionary to the poor. Like her, I wanted to be a missionary to the poorest of the poor. And Lee was with me on this. And so the whole reason we came into this movement of churches, I grew up in the traditional Church of Christ, but I knew that in order to be a missionary to the poorest of the poor, we needed more training. And so we decided to move to New York in order to get the training to be able to go to a third world country. We wanted to go to India. We targeted to go to Delhi. I really wanted to go to Calcutta, but at that time, you had to plant a flag, and they got, I think it was the London church planted their flag in Calcutta first. So I was like, oh man. So we decided, okay, let's go to Delhi. We made 3 trips to India. While I was there, I so wanted to meet Mother Teresa. And we went to Calcutta, and I thought, this is my opportunity. But I got really, really sick in Calcutta. I literally could not get out of the hotel room. And so I was like, I wanted to visit the Sisters of Charity. I wanted to meet her. I wanted to talk to her. But it just didn't work out, I thought. But then when we got to the airport to take our train from Calcutta to Delhi, there was the Sisters of Charity in the line in front of us. And in the middle of them, there was one that was about this tall. And she was stooped over a little bit, and all I saw was the back. And I said, Lee, that's Mother Teresa. And Lee looks at me, no, it can't be. I said, yeah, that's Mother Teresa. And so I snuck over, just trying not to be conspicuous. I took a look behind me, and I was like, I was so excited. It was Mother Teresa. And I watched every move that she made. I saw the luggage that she had. It wasn't Gucci. It was some cardboard boxes tied up with twine. That was her luggage. She went through the line. She sat down. And I said, Lee, I got to go talk to her. I got to just go. I have to. She said, I said, I'm going. And that's so unlike me to do something like that. Because I'm an introvert by nature. I'm a quiet guy by nature. But I was like, I've got to go talk to her. And so I went over, and she was so incredibly nice and warm. And she listened to me, and she answered my questions. And we had a nice little conversation right there in the airport. And it made me that much more want to be a missionary to the poor. But things changed. Along the line, things changed. And I never really got that opportunity to be in India. And when I say missionary, I'm talking about I wanted to go and preach, I wanted to go and teach, and I wanted to go and heal. I wanted to do some good. I wanted to share the gospel because to me it's all integrated. It's just all works together. I love Matthew chapter 4 where it talks about the ministry of Jesus, and it said he went teaching in the synagogues, preaching the good news, and healing those who were sick and had disease. And to me, that is the ministry of Jesus. It all works together. It's all integrated. We need the teaching part. We need that part where we get in there and we disciple people and we teach people. We need the preaching part. That means to share the good news. That's what that word means in the Greek. We need to be the herald of the king because we have great news and we need to share that good news and we need to be evangelistic, but we also need that healing ministry. And to me, the ministry of Jesus is like a great triangle. That's what the gospel is. That's what the ministry of Jesus is. You got the teaching, you got the preaching, you got the healing. And if you take any of those sides out, what happens? Falls flat. That's what the triangle does. It falls flat. We need it to be that way. And so, as a consolation prize, because we didn't get to go to India, we got to go to Jerusalem. I got to go to Jerusalem for a year. And on Saturdays in Jerusalem, it was so great because we would go out to the 4 Homes of Mercy in Bethany, in the West Bank, and we would just serve the poor there. And we would do our best to practice the healing ministry of Jesus on Sabbath. And we thought that was really appropriate to do it that way. And it was great. And we would go over there and we would just, we painted the walls and made beautiful murals on the walls. We sang to the people. We had skits. We fed the people. We ate with the people. We tried to just do anything that we could just to brighten up people's lives for a little bit because it was a really discouraging place that they were in. But as I was there, I was thinking, wow, this is where Jesus was. This is Bethany. I mean, this is where he would go over the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem. This is where Lazarus lived with Mary and Martha. They lived right here. In fact, the traditional site was just down the road. And I'm thinking, I'm literally walking in the steps of Jesus, doing the ministry of Jesus, helping the poor, reaching out to people that need help. This is so fantastic. And I love that. I love just being there where Jesus was. But then I had to remind myself that the steps of Jesus aren't just in Jerusalem. They're not just in Galilee. They're all over the world. They lead us any place where a person needs to hear the gospel, or a person needs help in their life, or a person that's sick, a person that's down and out, a person that's discouraged, a person that's poor, a person that's hungry. The steps of Jesus take us there. And I need to walk in the steps of Jesus wherever I am. The steps of Jesus lead us to the poor. He leads us forward and toward to step up to meet the needs of the poor. Jesus stepped toward the sick, the hungry, the naked, the marginalized, like women and children, and the Samaritans in his society. Those in prison, the dispossessed, the blind, the deaf, the demon-possessed, those suffering from leprosy. Jesus stepped up and stepped toward the poor because he had a compassionate heart, and his heart shows us the heart of God. I love the illustration that Jerry Shirley tells the story about a little girl who was in a classroom and she was working on a picture and working on it really detailed. And the teacher said to her, honey, everybody's got recess. Why don't you go out? She said, no, I got to work on this picture. I got to finish this picture. And the teacher said, well, what are you working on? And the little girl said, well, I got to finish this. I got to get it done. And the teacher said, no, what is it? What is it? And she said, well, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher said, oh, darling, no one knows what God looks like. The girl held up the piece of paper and said, they do now. And that's what Jesus does for us. He holds up that picture and said, this is what God looks like. Take a look at my life. This is what God looks like. And that's why we need to follow in his steps. His compassionate heart shows us the heart of God. Look in Luke 16. We're going to look at 2 verses in Luke. I encourage you, if you want to do a quick study on the Christian response to poverty or Jesus and the poor, just study out the Gospel of Luke, because the Gospel of Luke has the most stories and the most details and the most themes that deal with this topic right here. So just study out the Gospel of Luke. But in Luke 16, verse 19, there's the story of the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores. And longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table, even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried in hell, where he was in torment. He looked up and saw Abraham far away, with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. This is an amazing picture, an amazing story here, a parable that Jesus tells. The rich man seems to have everything in life, and yet he overlooked the needs of the poor. And when you're looking at a parable and trying to interpret a parable, one of the things that you need to look for is you need to look for that gotcha moment or that aha moment in which things are just sort of flipped on its ear, because that's what Jesus is trying to get people to see. He tells stories that people can picture in their mind, but then he adds a detail to it that's like, whoa, that shouldn't happen. And in this story, the detail is that the rich man wakes up and he's in hell and he's in torment. And Lazarus wakes up and he's right there beside Abraham, buddy with Abraham. Because in the Jewish mind, to have wealth was the same thing as to have the blessings of God. And so for this rich man to wind up in hell, they're like, well, why? You know, even the disciples asked Jesus, if it's impossible for the rich man to be saved, then who can be? And then Jesus lets them know, well, with God, all things are possible. But that's the point that's being made in this story is, wow, what is going on here? And they have to look at this and they have to think about it. And what's the detail that we see in this rich man's life that caused him to wind up in hell? It's the fact that there was a poor beggar at his doorstep, and he was callous and hard-hearted and non-responsive to the person's needs. He knew the man. He called him by name. Send Lazarus. He saw his condition. He overlooked the condition. And this in the Greek is actually a passive verb. God placed him at the door. He was placed at the door. Many scholars say that that's the divine passive, that Lazarus was placed by God at the door of the rich man. And I believe that God does that for us, that he puts the poor in our lives, puts them at our doorstep to give us the opportunity to have a compassionate heart like Jesus, to respond with compassion. And in this case, the rich man does not respond. And he could not have missed how desperate this poor man was, how desperate Lazarus was. When I was in seminary, one of the things that really made me want to try to help with poverty and help the poor was this story and the way one of my professors told it. Because he described the story and he talked about how this beggar was in such a desperate situation. I mean, he was in pain. He had sores on his body, and yet he could not afford any type of salve or oil to be able to heal those sores and to medicate those sores or to simply put medicine on his wounds. He was hungry, so hungry that he wanted the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table. Now, in that day and time, the tables were just off the ground. The rich man would have been on his side eating. And when the crumbs fell, they probably would have fallen into his beard. And his beard would have been nice and oiled because that's what rich people did. And so the crumbs fell into his beard, and they would take a day-old bread, a day-old pita, which they called a napkin, and they would literally scrape out their beards into their hand, and then they would throw the crumbs and throw that napkin, that day-old pita, under the table. And then the dogs typically would come in, and they would do all the cleanup. You know, if you have a dog around your house, I mean, we had a dog named Sunshine. Crumb fell to the floor, that crumb was gone. We did not need a vacuum cleaner when Sunshine was around because she was all over those crumbs. And that's what dogs tend to do. They go right after the crumbs, but these dogs didn't because they saw the sores on the rich man and they were licking those sores. And the rich man desperately wanted to get under that table to get those crumbs, to get that day-old bread. But he couldn't keep the dogs off of his sores. He couldn't get in there because the dogs were more interested in him than the crumbs. And that's a desperate situation. And that's what that man saw every day as God placed this man at his door, and he was callous and hard-hearted, and he overlooked it, and he ended up in hell. And that's the point of the story. That's the gotcha. This man should have been by Abraham's side, but because of his callous, hard heart, he ended up in hell. The way we treat the poor is a matter of our salvation. It's a matter of our churches and what we're going to be able to do as far as glorifying God, but personally, it's a matter of your salvation. And you need to get that because that's what the text says. Now let's look at the other response, the Good Samaritan. I love this story. Don't you love the story of the Good Samaritan? I mean, it's great. It's great in the same book that Jesus says, okay, this is how not to be, but this is how you ought to be. And in the Good Samaritan, we see this. It's in Luke chapter 10. verses 25 through 37. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Of course, Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. But then when you look on down in verse 29, it says he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. When he fell in the hands of robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So to a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, and that's the gotcha moment. That's the aha moment. But a Samaritan also passed by on the other side. But that's not what the Samaritan does. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses that you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, and he says to the church today, go and do likewise. Exactly. This is how we ought to be. This is what we ought to do. It is one of our favorite stories. And this idea of the Good Samaritan, everybody loves the Good Samaritan. And almost everybody in the world, when you mention a Good Samaritan, they know what that means. It's just common knowledge to people. A Good Samaritan is someone that goes out of their way to help somebody that has a need. That's a Good Samaritan. The term is so lauded in our country that there's a law called a Good Samaritan law to protect people that go out of their way to help someone, and maybe it doesn't go right. And so they've even put a law in place to protect people that try to be Good Samaritans. That's how the world views Good Samaritans. They love them. They're awesome. Wouldn't it be great if the word Christian meant that much to people? Wouldn't it be fantastic if the word disciple of Jesus meant that much to people? But if more Christians were Good Samaritans, then people would appreciate the word Christian more. We have to be a Good Samaritan. We have to go and do likewise. The old Jericho Road, it still exists today. You can go there, you can walk on it. My family, we used to go there. We'd have devotionals on it. Take some other people. We would all act out different characters. One would be the Good Samaritan. One would be the person that was left beaten up. There were the robbers. My kids always wanted to be the robbers. Should have known something was wrong at that point. Thankfully, by the grace of God, they want to be Good Samaritans now. That's good. But you can go there and you can relive this. But in our lives, we need to relive it every day because it happens around us every day. There are opportunities to help people. This man, all 3 of these people, they had the opportunity. They even had the resources, but only one responded. And that's the one that Jesus lets people know that this is your neighbor. This is the person that's acting right. This is the person you need to imitate, because that's what Jesus did. The priest and the Levite were callous to the needs of the injured man. They stepped back. They stepped around. They stepped away from him. They didn't step where Jesus would have stepped. Jesus would have stepped forward. He would have stepped up to the man. He would have helped the man out. That's what the Good Samaritan did. He was the person who loved. He was the one who acted like a neighbor. The priest and the Levite and the Samaritan, they each had the capacity to help. It was only one of them that responded to the opportunity. All of us that are sitting here today, you have the capacity to help people that are poor. If you drove a car here today, you have the capacity to help. If you hold a Bible in your hand and you bought that Bible with your own money, you are part of the rich in the world, and you have the capacity to help. What are you willing to do? The opportunities are there. You have the capacity. Do you have the heart now that's going to be turned into action, and let's go and do something? The rich man, the priest, the Levite, they were callous, they were apathetic, they were cold. And because of that, Jesus really condemns all of them. The Good Samaritan was the one who acted the way Jesus would have acted in the same situation. We can't step back, we can't step away, we can't step over, we can't step around the poor. We instead need to step forward, step forward, step up to help the poor. That's stepping in the steps of Jesus. Jesus extols the Good Samaritan for this, and then he tells this man and tells all of us through this man, go and do likewise. That's the directive for today. Go and do likewise. I'm not going to tell you how to do it because each of us are in a different situation. But this week, figure out some way that you can go and do likewise. Go and do. That's what Jesus wants us to do. That's walking in the steps of Jesus. I believe that we need to evangelize the world. I believe that we need to disciple people and strengthen people and cause the weak to become strong. I believe that we need strong family ministries and strong single ministries and strong campus ministries and strong teen ministries. I believe that. But I also believe with all of my heart that as a church, we have to respond to the needs of the poor around the world. And if not, we have missed the gospel, we've missed the ministry of Jesus, and we're just not doing it the way that he would do it. We have to go and do likewise. I've had people tell me, well, I'm afraid that if we emphasize the healing ministry of Jesus too much, then we'll lose our focus on evangelism, or we'll lose our focus on discipling, or we'll send so much of our resources to help the poor, we won't have enough to evangelize the world. Or if we send our best people to help the poor, we won't have enough to be ministers and to be missionaries. And I just say, it's all integrated. It all works together. And why are we worried about resources? God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. The whole world is his. He owns all the silver and gold in the world. He doesn't even deal in cash. That's how wealthy our God is. I have a different fear. I don't fear that we won't have enough resources. I don't fear that we're going to just come to a place where all of a sudden we don't have any people to send. I have a fear that if we don't respond with compassionate hearts to the needs of the poor around the world, then greed and materialism will eat us up. I fear what Jesus feared. Jesus never told us to fear the poor. Jesus never told us to fear responding to the needs of the poor. However, Jesus did tell us to fear the deceitfulness of wealth, the hoarding up of possessions, materialism, the love of money, greed, which is idolatry. These are things we ought to fear. These are realistic fears that we ought to have in our life. I fear the American dream, which is really the American nightmare. That we feel entitled to hold on to all of our stuff when people around the world are trying to live on nothing at all. That's the fear that I have. I fear us becoming a big, fat, greedy, materialistic, institutionalized denomination that has stopped practicing the compassion and love of Jesus because we're disconnected from the poor that God has put at our doorstep. The starving, the sick, the naked, the uneducated, the dying hundreds of thousands of people on this planet that we can step over, step away from, step around, or step up to and meet their needs. That's what I fear. There's always the potential to drift away from the Bible. But I don't fear us drifting in this way. I know some people say, oh, we need to be afraid of the social gospel. We're not even close to the social gospel. Social gospel is so liberal, they don't even believe in the inspiration of the Bible. We're not even close to that. We need to fear greed, materialism, the abundance of possessions, love of money, and the fact that we're not walking in the steps of Jesus if we don't walk to the poor and step up and meet their needs. In my life, the older I get, all I want to do is try to be like Jesus. That's all I care about. All I want to do when I study the Bible really is I want to get in the Gospels. I'll read one of Paul's epistles. I'll read a prophetic book. I'll even do some studying and some writing, but I always come back to the Gospels. Anytime I jump out of a gospel, I come right back to the gospel. I'm studying Ephesians right now. I'll jump back to the gospel. In fact, I'm in the Gospels as I'm studying Ephesians. And that's just what I want to be with Jesus. I want to be like Jesus. I want Jesus to be in my life all the time. And I think if we're really with Jesus, then we're going to walk in his steps. And I think we know his steps lead to the poor, the naked, the sick, the hungry, the down and out, the depressed, people that need help. That's where Jesus' steps lead. I want to close with the little thing I wrote called the With Jesus Life, taking Jesus wherever we go. In his steps, Jesus through the night, Jesus at sunrise, Jesus when the alarm rings, Jesus with the first cup of coffee, Jesus in our quiet time, Jesus in our morning workout, Jesus as we leave the house, Jesus on the morning commute, Jesus in the workplace, Jesus on the campus, Jesus when we take a test, Jesus at lunchtime, Jesus during the afternoon slump, Jesus on the commute home, Jesus at the dinner table, Jesus on a relaxing evening, Jesus on the golf course, Jesus at the football field, Jesus playing Xbox, Jesus at the movies, Jesus at Starbucks, Jesus at the mall, Jesus in the living room, Jesus when we're far from home, Jesus when we're surfing the net, Jesus when we answer email, Jesus when we text message, Jesus when we're on the phone, Jesus when we serve the poor, Jesus when we meet a need, Jesus when we heal a hurt, Jesus when we help the weak, Jesus when we reach the lost, Jesus when we stop and listen, Jesus when we encourage a friend, Jesus when we go to bed, when we sleep, when we dream, when we wake up, Jesus each new day. Jesus in every single thing we do, Jesus in every word, every conversation, every joke, every comment, Jesus in every sneeze, Jesus in every moment, Jesus in every space, Jesus in every place, Jesus in every relationship, Jesus with mom and dad, with our spouse, with our kids, with our neighbors, Jesus in every action, and yes, even Jesus in every inaction, Jesus when we're alone, Jesus when we're with our enemies, Jesus when we're with our friends, Jesus when we're up or down, Jesus when we're gray or blue, Jesus when we're on top of the world, Jesus when the world's on top of us. Jesus in good times, bad, feast, famine, joy, sorrow, ecstasy, tragedy, pleasure, pain, strength, weakness, smiles and frowns. Jesus up, Jesus down, Jesus right, Jesus left, Jesus forward, Jesus behind, Jesus in between. Jesus inside, Jesus outside, Jesus upside down, Jesus 360, Jesus 24/7, Jesus with us. The With Jesus life. Jesus, Jesus, I love thee. What a friend we have in Jesus. 'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus. Jesus is all the world to me. Jesus loves me, this I know. Jesus, keep me near the cross. Take the world, but give me Jesus. Jesus, lover of my soul. Anywhere with Jesus, I can safely go. Safe in the arms of Jesus. Stand up for Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. Clothed in Jesus, wrapped in Jesus, enveloped in Jesus, encircled in Jesus, enmeshed in Jesus, engulfed in Jesus, and yes, even embalmed in Jesus. Maranatha, come, O Lord, come quickly, King Jesus, in his steps, in the steps of Jesus. Amen.